When I pulled into my own driveway with my bags already packed, my daughter-in-law met me on the porch, crossed her arms, and said, "You're not coming with us, Ray. Honestly, you just hold everyone back, and it gets embarrassing." I stood there a moment. Then I set my suitcase down on the step. I smiled, and I said, "All right, drive safe." 8 days later, when they came rolling back into town and discovered I'd had every lock on the house changed, my own son called me 58 times in a single afternoon. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Ray Caldwell. I'm 71 years old, and for most of my life, I believed something simple, that if you worked honestly and loved your people and kept your word, the people closest to you would carry you the same way you carried them. I built the house I'm sitting in right now with these two hands. 41 years ago, board by board, after my shifts as an electrician, I ran my own contracting outfit in Hartwell, Ohio. For 36 years, I raised my boy Daniel in these rooms. And 6 years ago, I buried my wife Diane in the cemetery on the hill out past the feed store. And I learned what real quiet sounds like. It was the second week of July when it happened. Every year since the boys were little, the family took a week up at the lake cabin over at Marlow Lake, about 90 minutes north. That cabin had been in Diane's family for 3 generations. Her grandfather poured the foundation. We honeymooned there. When her folks passed, it came to us. And after Diane was gone, it came to me. I'd been looking forward to that week all year. I bought my granddaughter, Maddie, a little kid-sized tackle box and a set of carving tools because Maddie, who's 8 now, would rather be out in my workshop building birdhouses than doing just about anything else on earth. She's got sawdust in her blood. That one takes after her grandpa. So that morning, I had the truck loaded, the carving tools wrapped up in newspaper on the passenger seat, and I was checking the tie-downs on the cooler when Sloane's white SUV swung into my drive. Sloane is my son's wife. They married a little over 6 years ago. She came out of that car in her sunglasses and her white linen, everything looking like she was about to be photographed. And she didn't so much walk toward me as glide, the way she does when she's already decided how a conversation is going to end. "Ray," she said, "we need to talk before you load anything else." My son got out of the passenger side, and that surprised me. Daniel always drives. He's 39, my Danny, a good-natured kid who grew up too eager to please. And right then, he was looking at the gravel like there was something fascinating written in it. He couldn't meet my eyes. That was the first thing that turned my stomach. "What's this about?" I asked. Sloane took off her sunglasses, which she only does when she wants you to feel the full weight of her sincerity. "We've been talking it over as a family," she said, "and we think it's best if you sit this trip out. You've been forgetting things. You wander off. Last summer, you locked yourself out of the cabin twice, and you couldn't remember where you'd put the spare. It's a lot of stress for everyone. And frankly, the kids notice. Maddie notices. We just think you'd be more comfortable here, where things are familiar." I felt the heat come up the back of my neck. "Danny," I said, "son, look at me." He looked up, and what I saw in his face wasn't cruelty. It was something worse. It was apology mixed with helplessness. The look of a man who's been told a story so many times. He stopped questioning whether it's true. "Dad," he said quietly, "we just want you to be okay. You haven't been yourself. Maybe it's better this once if you rest." "Rest?" I repeated. "You went to bed before sundown every night up there last year." Sloane added, "Warming up now, because she always warms up. You kept talking about your knees and your prostate appointments. It's exhausting, Ray. It really is. We're trying to give the children a fun week, and it's hard when there's this constant cloud over everything. You're 71. Maybe it's time to act it instead of pretending you're 40. Now, my neighbor across the street, Walt Brennan, a man I've known 30 years, was out front pretending to coil his garden hose, and I knew good and well he could hear every word, and that by supper time half of Cedar Hollow Road would know that Ray Caldwell's family had stood in his own driveway and told him he was too far gone to come to the lake. That was the part that burned. Not the rejection, the audience. I'm not a man who makes scenes. So, I did the only thing my pride would let me do. I reached into the cab, picked up that newspaper bundle of carving tools, and I handed it to my son. "Give these to Maddie," I said. "Tell her Grandpa says happy carving." Tell her we'll do the birdhouse when she gets home." Then I picked up my suitcase off the step, and I made myself smile at Walt across the street. And I called out, "Change of plans. Going to stay back and finally fix that fence." And I carried my bag back into my own house and shut the door. And I stood in the hallway under 40 years of family photographs, every single one of them with me grinning like a fool. And I listened to the silence swallow me whole. I made coffee with hands that wouldn't quite hold steady. I sat at the kitchen table Diane, and I bought at an estate sale in 1986. And somewhere in that first hour, something happened to me that I want you to understand, friend, because it changed everything. The hurt started turning into something colder and clearer. They thought I was a confused old man who'd swallow whatever scraps they handed me and thank them for it. They thought I needed them far more than they needed me. And sitting there in my empty house, I started to wonder for the very first time whether I had that exactly backwards. I should tell you how Danny and Sloan came to have keys to my house in the first place, because that's where the whole thing rots. About 14 months back, Sloan had started showing up with casseroles and concern. She noticed I seemed tired. She worried about me being alone out here. And wouldn't it just make sense, she said, for her and Danny to move into the finished basement apartment I'd built years ago for Diane's mother, just for a while, just so somebody was close by in case I had a fall. It sounded like love. I was a lonely widower, and my boy wanted to be near me. And I said yes with a full and grateful heart. What I didn't understand then, and understood completely by the end of that first morning alone, was that the moment they moved in, Sloan had her hands on my mail, my filing cabinet, my mailbox key, and my whole quiet life. The first crack showed up 2 days later. My credit union called. A real call from a real fraud department. The kind any bank in this country will make when something looks wrong on your account. A young fellow named Marcus told me they'd flagged an attempted wire transfer of $40,000 out of my money market account, along with an application for a home equity line of credit against my house, and they wanted to confirm I'd authorized them. I had not. I had authorized nothing. He said the request had come in with what appeared to be my signature and a power of attorney on file naming Sloan Caldwell as my agent. I want to be clear about something because I've heard people say these things only happened to folks who weren't paying attention. I was paying attention. I balanced my own checkbook in pen. I had simply never imagined that the danger was living in my basement. I told Marcus to freeze everything, every account, and to flag my name. Then I sat very still for a long time. A power of attorney naming Sloan. I had never signed such a thing, which meant somebody had. That same afternoon, the mail carrier brought a certified letter that, by every law of probability, I was never supposed to lay eyes on. It had been forwarded back to me because the basement apartment had its own mailbox slot now, and a temporary hold Sloan had set up had lapsed while she was at the lake. The envelope was from Redfield Development Group. Inside was a letter addressed to me, thanking the owner and his representative for the productive meetings and confirming Redfield's preliminary offer to purchase the Marlow Lake property for $1.4 million, contingent on rezoning the parcel for subdivision into 6 lakefront lots. There was a site map. My cabin, Diane's grandfather's cabin, the one with our initials carved in the dock post, was marked for demolition. I read that letter standing up in my kitchen, and then I had to sit down. Here's where, if I'm honest, things might have gone differently, and where I think a lot of folks in my shoes get stuck, because I didn't have proof of who'd been pulling the strings. I just had a sick feeling and 2 pieces of paper. And then the phone rang, and it was the one call that turned the lights on. "Ray, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for 3 weeks." It was Patricia Holloway. Pat had handled Diane's estate, settled her mother's affairs, drawn up my own will. Sharp as a tack, 60-some herself, doesn't waste a word. "Ray, I left you 4 voicemails and sent a letter. Did you get any of it?" "I didn't get a thing, Pat," I said. "Not one." There was a pause on the line, and in that pause, I heard the whole shape of it. "That troubles me," she said, "'cause someone has been contacting my office claiming to act for you under a power of attorney. They wanted to know how to transfer the deed on the lake property and what the process would be to sell real estate on behalf of a relative with, and I'm quoting the words they used, declining capacity. Ray, I have never seen any such power of attorney pass through my hands. So I tried to reach you directly because I wasn't about to take a stranger's word for your competence. When you didn't answer, I got worried. I think you'd better come in this morning. And that, friend, is the difference a single honest phone call makes. My lawyer didn't mail me a letter and shrug when it went unanswered. She picked up the phone, and when I didn't answer that, she kept calling. And when that failed, she told me to come in person. If she'd done any less, I'd have lost everything. Diane's family spent 100 years building, and I might never have known how. I sat across from Pat Holloway an hour later while she laid documents across her desk, like a hand of cards. Somebody had been busy. There was the forged power of attorney dated 9 months back, my signature on it, a decent forgery. But I signed my middle initial with a little hook nobody ever gets right, and whoever traced it had gotten it backwards. There was the notary stamp, which Pat had already determined belonged to a notary whose commission had been suspended a year ago, meaning the notarization was bad on its face. There were the Redfield papers, and there was a thin folder that made my blood go cold. Copies of emails to my own family doctor's office requesting my records, and a referral inquiry placed by Sloan, asking how a family member would go about getting a geriatric patient evaluated for dementia and, if necessary, petitioning a court for guardianship. She wasn't just going to forge her way to your money. Pat said gently, "Forgery is fragile. It can be challenged. So the long game was to have you declared incompetent in front of a judge. Then the forgery wouldn't matter because a guardian could sell the cabin, drain the accounts, do all of it legally. The vacation, Ray. Keeping you home. Telling the neighbors you wander and forget. I'd bet my license that was part of building the picture. Every time they made you look confused, they were collecting exhibits." I asked her about my son. I needed to know if Danny was in on it. Pat slid one more page over. The Redfield correspondence listed Daniel Caldwell as a co-beneficiary of the sale proceeds, but she'd done some digging, and she'd found something that somehow made me feel both worse and better at once. Danny and Sloan were drowning. Sloan's event planning business had collapsed 2 years back, and she'd hidden it, taken on a second mortgage on their house, run up 6 figures on cards, all while keeping up the white linen life. Danny, Pat suspected, knew they were in trouble, but didn't know the half of what his wife was doing in his name and mine. He signed where she told him to sign. Men like your son, Pat said, drown one small yes at a time. I drove home, and I did the math on what it would take to fight this in court. Months, lawyers, my own competency put on trial by the very people I'd raised and fed. And then I made a decision. I was done being passive. I was done reacting. For the first time in years, I was going to think 3 moves ahead. That evening, I called a locksmith and booked him for the next morning, every door, while the basement sat empty and the family was still up at the lake, having their peaceful, Ray-free week. Then I drove to the hardware store, my old stomping grounds, and I bought 4 security cameras, the kind that ping your phone. Now, I'd wired half the houses in this county. Setting up 4 cameras was nothing. I put one on the driveway, one on the front door, one on the back, and the 4th, I drove 90 minutes north and mounted under the eave of the cabin's porch, pointed at the dock and the drive, because I had a feeling I was right. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened it and watched, in clear daylight, a pickup with Redfield on the door roll up to my cabin, and 2 men in hard hats climb out with a surveyor's tripod and start measuring my late wife's land, driving stakes into the ground by the dock where Diane and I used to sit with our coffee and watch the loons. They thought the family was away, and the owner was a doddering old fool 90 miles south. They had no idea the doddering old fool was watching them on a 4-inch screen, recording every second. The vacation was due to end on a Sunday, and when my family came home expecting to find the same agreeable, beaten-down old man they'd left in the driveway, they were going to find that man gone and somebody new sitting in his chair. The first call came at 7:51 Sunday morning. I was on my porch with my coffee watching the sun climb, and Danny's name lit up my phone. I let it ring out. The second came 4 minutes later. By the 5th, I was, God forgive me, beginning to enjoy myself, because I could picture them standing in my driveway with their luggage and their cooler and their suntans, staring at a front door whose new deadbolt caught the morning light, and not one of their keys turning. On the 7th call, I answered, Dad, the keys aren't working. Something's wrong with the locks. Nothing's wrong with them, son, I said. They're brand new. I had them changed. A silence. Then a scramble. Then Sloane's voice took over the phone the way it takes over everything. Ray, this is absurd. Open the door. We're exhausted. We've been driving since dawn, and the children need the bathroom. There's a gas station 2 miles back, I said. Don't be ridiculous. This is our home. No, I said, and I felt the words settle in my chest like a stone going still at the bottom of a pond. It's my home. My name is on the deed. My name alone. And I've decided who comes through that door. And it isn't the people who told my neighbors I'm losing my mind, so they could sell my wife's cabin out from under me. The quiet that followed was the loudest thing I ever heard. Then Sloane, careful now, the warmth dialing back. Ray, you're not making sense. You're confused. I think you've had an episode. Maybe we should call Dr. Halverson and have him come take a look at you. And there it was, friend. The exact move Pat had warned me about. Deployed in real time. Suggest I'm sick. Suggest I need a doctor. Build the record. Funny you'd say that, I told her, because I've already spoken with Pat Holloway, and with my credit union's fraud department, and with the county recorder, and I've got a folder on my kitchen table with your name all over it. Redfield Development. A power of attorney I never signed. A notary stamp that's been dead for a year. You want to talk about who's confused? The phone went to muffled chaos. Danny's voice rising, asking what I was talking about. Sloane hissing at him to let her handle it. Then Danny was on the line, and his voice had cracked clean down the middle. Dad, what is she saying about a power of attorney? Dad, what's going on? Ask your wife, Daniel, I said. Ask her about the $40,000 wire she tried to pull out of my account last Tuesday while you were all up there roasting marshmallows. Ask her why there are men from a development company driving stakes into your mother's land. That's a lie. Sloane snapped back on the phone. You can't prove any of that. I've got it on camera, I said. All of it. The calls kept coming after I hung up. 20, 30, 40. I sat on my porch in the sun and watched my own security feed like it was the best show on television. Danny pacing the driveway with the phone to his ear. Sloane sitting on the hood of the SUV with her face in her hands. And then the two of them squaring off and arguing, really arguing, arms going in a way I'd never once seen in 6 years of their polished marriage. Around 11 o'clock, a patrol car pulled up, which I'd been expecting. Officer Bauer was young and decent, and clearly wished he were anywhere else. Mr. Caldwell, we got a call about a family lockout. Your son and daughter-in-law say this is their residence, and you've barred them from it, and they've expressed some concern about your, well-being. I did Pat on standby. I handed Officer Bauer my deed, my driver's license, and a card with my lawyer's number. I told him there was an active fraud investigation, that the people in my driveway were not on any lease, that I was the sole owner of the property and of sound mind, and that he was welcome to call my attorney that very minute. He did. He stood in my yard and talked to Pat Holloway for 10 minutes, and I watched his posture change. When he hung up, he walked over to the driveway and explained to Sloane and Danny that this was my house, that I had every right to determine who entered it, and that if they had belongings inside, the lawful path was a supervised retrieval, not the front door. I watched Sloane's face go a shade I'd never seen on a human being. Call 58 came at 6:42 that evening, and by then, Danny's voice had no fight left in it, only panic. Dad, you're tearing this family apart. You're going to destroy my marriage. No, son, I said. Your wife did that the day she forged my name. I'm just the one who turned the lights on. That money would have been ours someday anyway. Sloane shouted from somewhere behind him, close enough for me to hear. I was just. And then she stopped because even she heard it. Thank you, Sloane, I said. My camera's got the surveyor, and now your husband's heard you say it out loud. I hung up and the phone went quiet, and it stayed quiet. I called around earlier and confirmed that every halfway decent motel within an hour was booked solid for the holiday. They'd have a long drive to find a bed. I sat on my porch as the light went gold and then gray, and I felt something I hadn't felt in longer than I could name. It wasn't happiness exactly. It was the feeling of a man who has finally stopped apologizing for taking up space in his own life. What came 3 days later was my son alone. I watched his car sit in my driveway a long time before he got out. When he finally walked up to the porch, my Danny looked 10 years older than he had the week before. His eyes were swollen. He hadn't shaved. He stood at the bottom of the steps like a boy who'd broken a window and didn't know whether to run. "Dad," he said, "can we talk? Please? I left Sloan at her sister's. I need you to tell me the truth, because I don't know what's real anymore." I came down and opened the door, and I let my son inside the house he grew up in. We sat at the kitchen table, and for the better part of 2 hours, I laid it all out. The forged power of attorney, the dead notary stamp, the Redfield offer, the demolition map, the wire transfer, the inquiries about getting me declared incompetent, the surveyors on his mother's land. I showed him the camera footage. I showed him the letter. And my boy sat there and came apart in front of me piece by piece. "She told me you were slipping," he whispered. "She had a whole list. The times you forgot. The times you got turned around. She said the lake trip was for your own good. That the stress was bad for your heart, Dad. She had me convinced I was being a good son by keeping you home." Did I forget those things, Danny? I asked him. All those times she had on her list, did they ever once happen? Or did you only hear about them from her? He went still, and I watched the realization roll across his face like a shadow crossing a field. Most of those stories, he understood now. He had never witnessed. He'd only been told. He asked me how I could even sit in the same room with him. I told him the truth, that being manipulated by someone you love and trust isn't a crime. It's a wound. And that the difference between him and his wife was that he'd driven over here alone to face it instead of hiding from it. I told him about Sloan's debts, the collapsed business, the second mortgage, the cards, all the things she'd hidden from him, too. And when I got to the part about how she'd planned to bulldoze the cabin where his mother spent every summer of her girlhood, my son put his head down on my kitchen table and cried like he hadn't since the day we buried Diane. When he could talk again, the first thing he said was, "She's threatening to take Maddie. If I leave her, she says she'll tell a judge I'm unfit, that I'm unstable, that I've got my crazy father living in my head." His hands were shaking. "Dad, I can't lose my daughter." I put my hand over his, and I said the only thing that mattered. "You are not facing that alone, son. Not for 1 minute of it. Pat Holloway is the best there is, and now she's ours. And you've got a whole folder of evidence that the woman making those threats forged a federal document. Let her threaten. We'll be ready. It's been a little over 6 months now since that morning in the driveway, and I want to tell you how it sits today. The forged power of attorney turned out to be exactly the thing Pat said it was: fragile, and worse than fragile for the person who made it. Forging a notarized document to seize an elderly person's assets isn't a family squabble. It's a felony. The county prosecutor's office took an interest the moment they saw the dead notary stamp in the bank's fraud report. Sloan's lawyer spent a lot of energy trying to make this a misunderstanding between relatives, but it's hard to argue misunderstanding when there's an attempted $40,000 wire and a demolition plan with your husband's father's house on it. The Redfield deal evaporated the day they learned the owner's representative had no authority. And once the divorce attorneys started turning over rocks, they found more than any of us wanted to. The hidden debts, the lies to Danny, the second mortgage she'd signed his name to, the custody threat she'd waved around went exactly nowhere, because it's awfully hard to convince a judge that the unstable parent is the one who didn't commit fraud. And me. The kindest revenge of all happened in a quiet office downtown. When the dust was settling, the court appointed a psychologist, a sharp woman named Dr. Anita Ralph, to evaluate the very thing Sloan had bet everything on, whether old Ray Caldwell was losing his mind. Dr. Ralph spent the better part of an afternoon with me, running her tests, asking her questions, reviewing my history. Her report came back without a hair of doubt in it. No cognitive decline, no impairment. In fact, she wrote, Mr. Caldwell's decision to investigate the suspicious activity rather than ignore it, and to act to protect himself, reflected sound judgment and a clear mind. I keep a copy of that report in the same drawer where I keep Diane's wedding ring. Some things you hold on to. This morning I was out of my workshop, and my granddaughter Maddie was at the bench beside me, sticking her tongue out the corner of her mouth the way she does when she's concentrating, sanding the roof of the third birdhouse we've built together since she and her dad moved into the basement apartment. And the same apartment, though it doesn't feel like the same place anymore. Danny's downstairs now, just him and Maddie, while he gets back on his feet. His divorce was final last month. He's quieter than he used to be, steadier, like a man who learned something the hard way and decided to keep it. "Grandpa," Maddie said, holding up the little house. "Is it good?" "It's better than good," I told her. "It's the best one yet. And next, we'll build that sailboat I promised you, the one that really floats." She cheered like I'd handed her the moon. Danny came out with 2 coffees and handed me one. And we stood there in the sawdust and the morning light watching his girl line up nails. She's not quite old enough to hammer. "Dad," he said, "I keep thinking about how close I came. How I almost helped them do it to you. To Mom's place." "You're here now, son," I said. "That's the part that counts." He was quiet a while, and then he said something I'll carry to my grave. "She spent 2 years telling me you were the problem, that you were a burden we had to manage." He shook his head slowly. "But when my whole life caved in, where'd I go? Who'd I run to? You weren't the burden, Dad. You were the only solid ground I had. The man I was a year ago would have been grateful just to be allowed along on the trip, grateful to be tolerated. He'd have opened that door the first time it was knocked on and apologized for the trouble. But that man is gone, and I don't miss him. Sloan was wrong about nearly everything, wrong about my mind, wrong about my spine, wrong about my son's loyalty in the end. But she was right about one thing, without ever meaning to be. She told everyone this old man was finished, irrelevant in the way. And it turned out I wasn't in the way at all. I was the foundation the whole thing was standing on. They just couldn't see it until somebody tried to pull it out. If you've stayed with me this far, friend, then I suspect you already know that the people who try to take the most from us are sometimes sitting at our own tables, calling it love. So let me ask you the same thing I've been asking myself all these months. If you'd been the one standing in that driveway with your bags packed and your family driving away, what would you have done? Have you ever watched someone you raised look at you like a burden? Tell me down in the comments. I read every one. And before you go, hold on to the people who show up for you when everything falls apart. Don't wait for a crisis to tell them they matter. Trust the quiet voice that says something's wrong. Never apologize for taking up space in your own life. You're never too old to stand tall, and it's never too late for the ones you love to find their way home to you. Thank you for sitting with an old man and his story. It means more than you know.